Okay, hello everybody. Very nice to see you. Thank you very much for coming on such a strange weather day, but we're here now, so we can warm you up with some intellectual debates. So today it's Cybersalon, the dark side, and we all were reading Aldous Huxley, The Brave New World, published in 1932. Where he forecasted that in the future leaders will be controlling the populations not with surveillance and pain, but with soma tablets and lethargy-induced pleasuredom. And I think we about got there. So today we wanted to find out a little bit more about how that soma algorithm is induced on us. We know that there's about 4 billion videos, about 400 videos uploaded every minute. And we on average spend hour to 2 hours on YouTube every night, going from one video to another. So we wanted to find out a little bit more how that follow-on algorithm is actually performing, what can we find about it, and maybe investigate if we can get better access for researchers and get a little bit more of regulatory angle on it. So today we have a very illustrious trio of people who are looking at algorithms on the platforms. But before we kick off full dark side dive, we're going to hear from Wendy Grossman. She's going to talk about John Perry Barlow, who has passed away on 7th of February, a very inspirational force behind digital rights movement. And we just thought it would be appropriate in this context to see what was his contribution and influence to the early digital rights movement and what we've got to work with today. So, Wendy? And the hashtag for the Cybersalon is on the side here.
Can you give me?
Yeah, it's just.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, there we go.
The reason I called it the end of cyberspace is that cyberspace was as a concept made sense when we had to wait for modems to dial up, and it really did feel like you were going someplace else. None of the people you met online were people you knew in your real life, so there was this kind of sense of a different space that you were going to visit. And I think that's either dying or dead now. You know, a 10-year-old today, the people they talk to online are the people who are in their real life. Their phone is connected all the time, if they have one. If they don't, their parents' computer is connected all the time. There just isn't that separation anymore. And as we go forward, it's going to be even more and more true, because things that connect to the internet are going to be inside our bodies and in our cities. So in 1996, when cyberspace was still like kind of a vibrant concept that everybody understood, John Perry Barlow wrote a thing called the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace. And this was the opening rant. And I have to tell you that I have friends who are in their 30s who are internet active, who are digital rights activists of various kinds, and they found this really inspiring. And the Declaration was written very much with Thomas Paine's Common Sense in mind. And if you're not familiar with Common Sense, it was a pamphlet that helped launch the American Revolution. So he did have in mind this kind of activist thing. And after he died, Mike Godwin, who was one of the many of us who were deeply embarrassed by this at the time, because we're going, oh, come on, governments are not going to have nothing to do with cyberspace. Godwin came up with a theory that actually what Barlow was trying to do was not state a blueprint for how things should be, but that he was trying to inspire activists to protect the internet and to ensure that the rights we had online were not less than the rights we had offline. And if that was the goal, then I think Barlow, to a large extent, succeeded. He has, you know, this thing and some of the other things that he wrote really did inspire hundreds of activists around the world in many different locations to go and try to protect the internet from being turned into basically a fancy form of television where, you know, you point and click and everything is laid out for you and you do nothing. And there was a lot of belief in 1996 that the internet was a two-way, very active medium, unlike television, that it was something where people wrote and contributed, and then, you know, now we have YouTube, and there are kids who spend hours on every day looking at YouTube, apparently. And there are YouTube stars that anybody over 40 has never heard of, but who have millions of followers. So, you know, I don't think it's clear whether, I would like to think that the internet has more than one future, and that future is not going to be people just staring at televisions, basically. And if that happens, maybe this was part of why. But I wanted to talk a little bit about where it came from and why, and what it sort of means for us going forward. And it was written in response to the 1996 Telecommunications Act. Now, this particular piece of American legislation is mostly famous for the Communications Decency Act, which was an attempt to impose censorship on the internet. And that was really a lot of what Barlow was reacting to. And in the end, it was taken to court, and the Supreme Court eventually ruled it unconstitutional, which is what everybody said would have to happen. But unfortunately, as a byproduct of that, we were all focused on the Communications Decency Act, and the real damage was the other parts of the act that we weren't paying quite so much attention to, which allowed the telecommunications companies that had been split apart in 1984 when AT&T was broken up because it was too big a monopoly. It started allowing them to merge back together, like the little melting pieces of the liquid metal man in Terminator 2 running together in the factory. And so in most parts of the US now, there's only one or two broadband providers. And when you think about what that means for what they can get away with, and that the current makeup of the Federal Communications Commission wants to get rid of network neutrality, you can sort of see why we really should have been paying a lot more attention to the other parts of the Telecommunications Act. And I think in the long term, this is going to be the damaging part, because the Communications Decency Act was probably never going to stand. Now, in this country, where you don't have a First Amendment, the UK government is gleefully trying to censor everything it can. And I don't know if you're aware that there's a bunch of filtering provisions going through, being created as we speak. And the Open Rights Group, which I was one of the first people to join the advisory council, is one of the organizations kind of fighting against that. Lawrence Lessig, in somewhere around 2000, wrote a book called Code, and in it he talks about four modes of governance: norms, market, technology, and law. And so I think the proposal that governments don't have anything to do in cyberspace is knocking out law. And there are real problems with that, because we have a situation right now where there's a lot of imbalance between us and the companies we depend on, people like Google, Facebook, you can fill in the blank. We can't negotiate privacy policies. We can only accept or reject them. We can't predict the technology changes that a company makes for its own business reasons. For example, Google had bought a company called, I think it's Revolve, that made certain smart home products, and it decided it didn't want to support them anymore, so it's just discontinued it and basically left the customers with no support. And this happens all over the technology landscape. We can't predict their business models or plans. We have no relationship with some of the third parties that they share data with. We don't have any insight into what who Facebook shares data and insights with, or what impact it really has on us. Same with YouTube. The customer and an IT failure in one place can immobilize millions. I was amazed by the British Airways crash at Heathrow last year, when they apparently had no plan for an earthquake, because they literally had no idea how to get people out of the terminal, or how to get them food or water or anything else. And I've read that it was the angriest place on the planet for about 4 days. And you sort of go, what was their plan if there'd been a fire? I mean, it didn't have to be an IT failure. If you're over 40, you probably find that more and more websites are written in pale, skinny gray type, and they're very hard to read. And we can't do anything about that either. This is the future. Medical devices that are implanted in our bodies. What happens when, at what point is it appropriate, at what point in the middle of surgery is it appropriate to discuss the quality of the encryption algorithm with your doctor, or which intellectual property rights the brain implant is claiming over your thoughts. My favorite line from Privacy Law Scholars in 2016 was, "A pancreas has never reported to the cloud before." You think about the things in your body, talking to the things on the street, talking across the internet to people you're not sure who they are. When we get there is no way that we're going to be able to protect people and ourselves with just technology, law, and community norms. We are going to need government. We are going to need to find ways to work with people that don't really understand a lot of what we understand. And so I still think that rejecting government as a player is a bad idea. I had some more future questions, but going back for a second to this guy, that's Pierre de Coubertin. He is the founder of the modern Olympics, and I would say he sounds exactly like Barlow there. Government, as soon as government is involved in sports, it's dangerous. Now, what he was talking about was not stuff like state-sponsored doping like the Russians have done. What he was talking about is the state interfering in sports and governing sports. In other words, if you were an anti-doping authority, you are claiming that you can do stuff and you don't need the government shouldn't be involved. Well, you can see what that's done in sports. So, it's just a kind of an example. And this is my last slide, which has some links if you need them. Thank you.
Well, things were always complicated, as we know, in cyberspace. So the second person today, which we have great pleasure to host, is Alessandro Gandini. Alessandro is a digital sociologist, someone who we were very keen to co-opt to Cybersalon, because most of our research is quantitative, while Alessandro explores the qualitative aspects of cyber with great aplomb, and today we would like to follow his work on unraveling YouTube algorithms.
Thank you. My starting point today is to tell a little bit more of why we, in a way, thought with Eva and other people to hold this event around YouTube. It's because Sofia Jacopoulou from Middlesex University, Jane Arthurs, and I have just published this, which is a special issue. I'm sure many of you are interested into that. If you want, I'm just doing this as a self-promotion. I know it's going to be short, don't worry. Where essentially we sort of try and make sense of the 10 years of existence of YouTube and what is this about. So there's a bit of an introduction that we co-wrote with Sophia and Jane, and that's something I'm going to mention briefly later on. And there's a whole bunch of papers, 6, where a number of the issues that we also unpack in the introduction are mentioned. So for anyone who's interested in knowing more about this topic, there's plenty to read. And one of the authors I'm particularly glad is here, Sophie. Hi, say hello to the rest of the people. Sophie has written a beautiful paper on vlogging, and I'm going to mention her stuff a little bit later on in my work, because I think it's a fascinating way to study the way in which algorithms produce outcomes and what kinds of outcomes they are in the sort of real life of people like YouTubers, vloggers. But I'll start, I'm sort of hijacking my own presentation here. I'll start from this cover. Do you remember this? I guess most of us do. I promised a few times myself over the years in doing slides to my students of never using this cover again, and then here we are. that was from 2006. It was on New Year's Day, and it came out and it sort of glorified the idea that YouTube was giving us a stage, a way to, and then they marketed upon it, broadcast ourselves. So we thought with the special issue and the sort of discussions that we held before this event tonight, there was a necessity to sort of try and make sense of what has happened in 10 years. And for us, of course, from the academic point of view, this has been the sort of outcome of a conference that we actually held in at Middlesex University in 2016. But then the question for us is, what has happened over these 10 years? So I'm going to run through and then get to the heart of the matter, hopefully quite quickly. Starting from this, you might remember this guy. Someone remembers this guy? This guy is the first video, is the guy in the first video uploaded on YouTube. It was in 2005, before it was owned by Google, before everything. It's a bit of a creepy video. It's one of those videos you wouldn't post now because it's not curated. There's pretty much nothing that makes it appealing. Actually, it is a sort of historic archival element here. It's something that we don't have to forget. That's how it started. It began in 2005 from the initiative of PayPal employees who founded YouTube as a sort of a on the side, so as sort of spare time activity, and then this was purchased, of course, from with like a lot of money by Google a little bit more than a year later, and now features in 89 local versions. That's the map out there. You can see the red. The red essentially shows you where there's YouTube, and it is one of the most highly ranked websites on Alexa, which is the sort of unofficial official ranking for websites online, and there's as Eva mentioned also, there's 6 billion hours of videos watched every month and 100 hours of video uploaded every minute. So we're talking about something that matters in many ways for popular culture, and in the broader sense for not just because it's a media with videos in it. In the introduction that we, Sophia, Jane and I wrote for this special issue, we talk about a number of things, and I'm going to go through a little bit quickly on those. So one of the things we say, and also a few of the papers that we present in the special issue talk about, is the idea of YouTube as not just simply a repository of video, but a commercial space, a hybrid commercial space where, of course, advertising plays a big role. And the reason, well, this is one of the reasons. There's this graph that kind of shows you how it has, in a way, taken over in some way from TV in the way in which video products are consumed. So if when I was a kid, after dinner, I usually went on and turned on the TV, and somebody will have me entertained in a flow, let's say, mode. Now, most of specific demographics, especially younger demographics, are going to go online, and especially on YouTube, to do that. And you can see this also in the way in which influencers are so important, and this is a marketing term, of course, that indicates how certain YouTubers, but not just YouTubers, of course, social media users in many ways, I'm sure you know all that, are very relevant in the way in which they promote products or brands, and the way in which this is taken by especially the youngest audiences in as a way to sort of engage with buying certain products. So that's one point we make. I'm sure you've seen this graph as well too. I'm just going a little bit quickly here just to give a sense of where we are. There's, of course, a few of these people have actually made a job out of it. And of course, now many will sort of remember Pewdiepie has been for a long time the most important YouTuber and the most well paid, before he decided to do the stupid thing and use anti-Semitic and racist content in his videos, and of course something went wrong after that. So no longer such influential, but still a bit of an interesting story. If you don't know the full picture, of course, about Pewdiepie, it's an interesting story. And if you want to locate it into the context, that's the context of transgression and the transgressive culture that permeates the online world online. The key textbook is Angela Nagel's Kill All Normies. It's a fantastic book on the way in which the transgressive is the new normal online and that's probably why PewDiePie has sort of tried to make this sort of alt-right statements. Eventually there has been a backlash for him, but it is very widespread, and of course, no surprise, this is the baseline for the sort of cultural territory in which something like Trumpism has developed. But of course, we can talk about it some other time. Then we talk about vlogging. Vlogging, again, Sophie's paper is one of those papers who look at vlogging practices, the way in which these have become a form of a genre in and of itself of media production. This guy is Casey Neistat, is one of the most important vloggers at the moment, an actual entrepreneur of modern times in many ways. Of course, for those who like this, it's a fantastic attempt at self-expression. For people like me who are slightly more critical in many ways, and I'm sure it's a pain to live with me in that sense, it's a more problematic context. So how do you locate all this in the context of an ecosystem like YouTube that develops as a reputation economy, where you are constantly, there's a sort of ranking culture behind the way in which products are conceived and put into a video format. And then there's music, which is the way in which I'm going to talk about algorithms and their relevance today. You can recognize this video, I guess. Some of you can. Gangnam Style, Psy. That's the most viewed video on YouTube of all time. It's a music video, if you like it or not. It's music. It's Korean music specifically, so it has a big subcultural angle on the side of it. And eventually, this tells a story. The story is that YouTube is the most important music platform of the present day and age, despite the existence of places like Spotify, Apple Music, Deezer, and many others. YouTube is still the first port of call for people who want to listen to music. And especially they do this through one example of many of algorithms that technically are called collaborative filtering algorithms. So essentially, you may also like algorithms. So algorithms that recommend content to users. And in a way, this has been the starting point of my reflections, and I'll show you why, which is how these videos appear on our screen. Is it a matter of a technical form? Is it something that reflects our social uses of the medium? To answer this question, I've done a little bit of research in the past with colleagues from back then. All of us were at the University of Milan. Now we are in a bit of a diaspora. We are all over the place. Looking at the way in which music videos cluster through YouTube. And we've done some what scholars call digital methods research, so using the API, the application programming interface, and downloading 22,000 and counting videos of YouTube tagged with the hashtag music. And doing a very simple operation of network analysis, which is what gives you this fancy picture that of course doesn't mean anything for now. We have been able to group the videos together. So our sort of commonsensical starting point was, if they group together, there may be something that keeps them together as a logic. And that's the logic that we found out. So these are sort of the groups that you've seen in the previous picture, labeled and tagged. These groups, in the vast majority of cases, operate through a logic of what we normally and commonsensically call music genres. So there's rock, pop, and others. Then there are around 10%, which may seem not necessarily a big number, but it's actually a big number in relative terms, of videos that are that sort of adhere to a logic that we define as situational. So the fact that these videos are not necessarily the product of cultural understanding as in the old terms, so I'm listening to pop, rock, or whatever. They are the reflection of social practices behind the viewing. So the fact that these videos come together are because there's a social activity behind them. And here is when things, and this was in 2014, so around 2 years before Spotify and other platforms started to use playlists as in the very similar way. So music for running, music for chilling, and all these kinds of things. What we found out there was an existing social logic behind this. And of course with some fun on it, because of course you have relaxing music, you have a number of sort of situational genres, one may call it, but also things like hair dryer sound, which I'm sure some of you know, which are videos on YouTube that are entirely made of hair dryer noise. White noise, which apparently is for making babies sleep. So, you know, that's a tip for you for the future. And that becomes a question which also in one of the papers, again, in some of the papers for the special issue is, I'm getting to that. I know you're laughing, but I'm getting to that. That some of the authors in the special issue ask themselves, how do we study all these algorithms? Now, Sophie's paper has one way of doing that, which is called reverse engineering, the idea of trying to understand the outcomes by sort of, again, reverse engineering the way in which the people using these tools and sort of inhabiting these platforms are making in order to then do and know a lot more about what the algorithm is doing. The digital methods way is another way. The point is that there's a sort of overall conception of the algorithm as what some scholars call a black box. So we don't know how the code is structured, we don't know what happens inside it, but we know it produces outcomes. Now, the music study we did, it essentially shows that these outcomes are not necessarily only computational, they're not necessarily only the result of technological infrastructure, they're social. And in a way, that's what I think we need to go and look for more closely into. So the social and cultural construction of the algorithms is what I think we need a lot more, instead of focusing on unpacking the code and looking at the open source aspect of it, which is very important. Of course, if these codes were open source, we could access the YouTube algorithm, know a lot more about it. What we need to know more, I think, is how the code is constructed within empires like Google and others. And in the sort of next step for this study, I've been trying with another Italian colleague from the University of Siena, Tiziano Bonini. We've been trying to look into the playlist algorithms. So the algorithms that are making essentially semi-automated playlists on Spotify, like New Music Friday. And it has been pretty impossible to interview anyone working at Spotify and other platforms like that, because they simply don't give you access. Or if they give you access, then, as in other cases, they make you sign an NDA, which means it is difficult to understand what you can and cannot say about what you have discovered within this. So as a researcher, it's a question mark and it's a problem. And then, of course, there's a lot more that lies within this. And why I think the social side and the cultural side of how these algorithms are constructed and the way in which this produce outcomes is very important, also goes back to the idea of YouTube as a hybrid commercial space. I'm sure you remember that in 2017, videos were, in a way, the algorithm running the advertising model of YouTube essentially was changed, and that's consistent in a demonetization. So eventually YouTubers earning less from the way in which they used to do beforehand. Now, this internet meme, which I found online, and I take no responsibility whatsoever for what is inside it, essentially says that, well, you know, guess what? Maybe that's the progression. Maybe in 2016 everything was good, and now we had videos that were demonetized and YouTubers earning less revenue, and then again, and then maybe at some point this will become a co-op. We'll see. Of course, it's a question mark, but the whole point is it's a context that is a repository of popular culture that gets constructed in a way that is very opaque. And we need to know a lot more, and that lot more is not just knowing about the infrastructure, it's knowing about the organization aspects that concern the infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. I think we will get to the questions after Jamie. So Jamie is researching on different platforms. His background is also academia, but I'm not going to tell from which college, so you can talk to him later. But he is interested in esports, in streamers, and particularly in Twitch and the digital labor as it develops on the gaming platform. So over to Jamie.
Thank you very much. So I work at 3 different institutions. 2 are on strike, 1 is not. So I thought the best way to do this would just be to only say every 3rd word of my presentation. Is that going to work? No, I joke. I will say all of it. But thank you, Alessandro, for giving a brief introduction of our campaign. And it would be great to have support from people in the room. But what I want to talk about today is I do lots of different kinds of research, most of it about digital work. And so what I want to talk about is a research project that I've been working on with a colleague, Dr. Mark Johnson, who isn't based in the UK, so I can tell you where he works because he's not on strike. He's at the University of Alberta. And we've had a project about Twitch, which I think can illustrate some of the things that Alessandro has talked about. And what I want to focus on is how we understand these platforms and how they work, maybe thinking about the role of algorithms and the kind of dark side, but also focusing on how people work on these platforms, because I think this can illustrate a dark side that can tell us something about work today and about how our interaction with these platforms has changed in lots of ways. But the first thing is, in many ways, we were very lucky, as good research often relies on an element of serendipity and luck, is Mark and I were invited to do research with Twitch. We've met lots of other researchers who have wanted to do projects with Twitch, and it's very difficult to gain any access. But they saw Mark on TV, ironically on traditional TV, on the BBC, and said, you and your colleague should come and do some research with us. We have to sign NDAs to do this kind of research. So what I will tell you is they've never refused to let us publish anything, but you might not be able to believe that, because if we hadn't been able to publish anything, we couldn't tell you that we hadn't. But just take my word for it that we haven't had any problems with the NDA so far. And I think in some ways this is a result of the growth of the platform. People might know that Twitch was purchased by Amazon for $1 billion 2 years ago now. So they have access to, amongst other things, probably some of the best data scientists in the world. You know, they can do the quantitative analysis on their platform. But what they said to us is, we would like qualitative researchers to come in. We would like you to do ethnographic research. And we kind of asked them, you know, why would you like us to be involved? And they said, oh, you know, just be good to have another angle on how Twitch works and what people do. I think in part, sometimes people like having researchers around because it makes them feel like they're worth being studied and so on. But they've effectively just let us have access to the platform, so to go to the physical convention that they run each year on the west coast of the US, and also to do lots of interviews. But even when you have access, these platforms are still very difficult to think about how you do research. So we've taken a 3-fold approach to doing this. The first is to do real traditional ethnographic research at Twitchcon, which is this big convention they run each year. So to go and spend time with people who their job is to stream themselves playing video games to an audience. A job that my mum still finds amazing exists. And when I tell her this, she thinks I've just made it up because, you know, the idea that that could be a career path. Probably too late for me, but the young me would have loved the idea of playing video games as a profession. So to spend time with people in a physical environment, so outside of the kind of the platform interaction, and to try and understand what makes these people do what they do and so on. This provides us an opportunity to do interviews with people, and we've so far conducted 100 interviews with professional streamers, so people whose main income they receive from their activities on the platform. And we've been able to experiment a little bit with how we do this. So we do video interviews with people who stream because it puts them at ease. They're used to talking to a camera. And we found actually that when we tried to do traditional interviews, people found this quite uncomfortable. But talking into a camera is the kind of normal mode for their interaction. And so we've been capturing video interviews and are lucky enough to have some auto transcription software via Twitch and Amazon, which is, you know, a researcher's dream in many ways, but there are some ethical problems with that too. And then also Mark has been doing digital ethnographic research, so watching huge numbers of Twitch streams and delving into the chat function, which I don't know how many people here have ever watched a stream on Twitch. So you had a chance to read some of the chat comments. So this is the first dark side that I want to talk about, is the kind of, you know, completely toxic chat that you find in many examples. So Mark has delved into that. That's an area that I find a little bit too unpleasant to do research in lots of ways. But this is a problem that YouTube also faces. If you're trying to monetize this content, how do you deal with chat that many advertisers would balk if they saw the kind of conversations that are happening? And this has become a bit of a problem for Twitch on some of the more high-profile streams, particularly ones where advertising is used, and many users understand that if they troll in a particular way, they can not only upset the streamer and Twitch, but also the advertiser too, because advertisers don't want to be associated with particular kinds of topics. And so what we've been trying to do is to understand how a platform like Twitch, in which people perform their play, they broadcast their own play onto a platform. Firstly, why on earth do people watch this happening? Which in some ways is perhaps a similar question to what was posed at the very beginning. Why are people watching this kind of content? But also, what's it like to do this as work? And what could that perhaps tell us about other forms of work? And so I think the first thing for people who might not be aware of some of the statistics, the year before last, there were 2 million people regularly streaming their own video game play on Twitch. Now, of course, this has the kind of pyramid structure that you get with YouTube. So there are some incredibly highly paid streamers, people who are making, you know, way over $1 million a year purely from subscriptions on Twitch. But then there's also a vast number of people who stream to one person, to 10 people, to no one. A huge number of people who see this as their opportunity to forge a career, to do something different. And in some ways, we're as interested in the people at the top, the people who've made it, who are incredibly successful, as also the people who are not making it, who are deciding to plow hours and hours of their own time speaking into a void, essentially. And so a lot of the things that we've tried to look at is how is a streamer successful? What is it that people who watch someone playing video games, what is it they want to see? What makes a convincing stream? And in a lot of the research that we found, there initially are people who are very, very successful on the platform because they entered it early. They had the advantage of being first movers. And one of our participants said, you know, Twitch was like the Wild West. You know, when I started, it was like the Wild West. The gold rush has happened, and now there are millions of people trying to forge careers. And this person had quite an interesting story in lots of ways. He went to university when it wasn't quite as expensive as it is now. Didn't like it too much, left in his second year. Went back to university, tried another degree, didn't really like it. Ended up working in car phone warehouse, so selling phone contracts to people. And decided he'd have a go at this thing called Twitch, which had recently been established. When we spoke to him, he'd just got back from, I think he'd been to Tokyo, New York, somewhere in Europe, and then on to the West Coast. So he'd been flying around, talking about video games and generally having quite a good time. And told us he'd just bought a 4-bedroom house in cash in the UK. And, you know, was having quite a great time, really. And he said, you know, I get to do my passion, I love it. You know, I get up at midday, I play video games, I talk to people. And in many ways, he's the kind of story that Twitch love. You know, here's somebody who wasn't able to find another career, very charismatic, very knowledgeable about video games, and could clearly build an audience. You know, he has hundreds of thousands of fans who watch him play. But for him, he said in many ways, he didn't think that he would make it now. He didn't have another way to build an audience. And so we also talked to people who were trying to make it, people who, could they offer advice to other people? And here part of the problem is if you log on to Twitch as a user, how do you find content amongst 2 million broadcasters? If you're featured on the front page or you're featured high up in a particular game, it's much easier for you to build an audience, to get more viewers. But it's completely opaque how that process works. How something is, are we counting down? How something is given priority or is given a spot that allows you to build an audience. And when we talk to people, there's a certain subjectivity in Twitch streamers that's discussed. So when we said to people, how do you make it? In general, what people said to us is, to be a success on Twitch, what you have to do is work. If you put in the hours, you will make it as a Twitch streamer. And so we spoke to many people who would stream 10, maybe 15 hours a day. They might work 70, 80, 90, 100 hours a week on Twitch, with the idea that if you just put in enough time, that first viewer would appear. From that first viewer, the next 10 would appear. From that 10, the 100, the 100, the 1,000, the 100,000, the flying around the world talking about video games would all happen if you were to just put in enough time. And there was no sense that the people who were successful at present on the platform had been able to leverage success in esports, pre-existing communities on YouTube or on Reddit. It becomes a kind of neoliberal subjectivity in a way, that if you put in the hours, you can make it as a Twitch star. And so for the platform, for Twitch, this starts to become a bit of a concern. Because if people are putting in huge amounts of hours and not particularly getting anything back out of it, this creates a kind of a dark side or an underbelly to the platform. And some of the examples that can be seen with this is a prominent Twitch streamer who publicly admitted to using amphetamines on stream to be able to keep up the long shifts he thought were required in order to make it. The cases of people collapsing on streams after streaming non-stop for 24 hours and so on. And this is a result of, in many ways, a flight from other kinds of work. The person I spoke about earlier who worked in car phone warehouse selling phone contracts to people who didn't really want them, or the lack of occupational alternatives to people, is the idea that you could then play video games becomes quite an exciting prospect. People might watch me play video games, and I'm not going to have to get pushed around by a boss in some kind of precarious job I don't want. But the reality is that for many people, they're not going to be able to make it. And that means doing something different on your stream to make it attractive. Perhaps you stream for 24 hours. Perhaps you do something more and more outrageous. You find some way to push the envelope that might mean that your stream becomes discovered or spotlighted. And I think Alessandro touched on this a bit with YouTube. We're seeing more and more scandals emerge in this kind of performance because people want to stand out from the crowd. And I think what we're going to see is these kind of platforms changing in terms of how things are monetized. So perhaps we'll end up on the fourth section of the meme with these communist platforms in which everything is distributed fairly. But I just want to reflect briefly on the role of Amazon with Twitch, because in many ways Amazon underpins lots of these activities because of Amazon web servers on which huge parts of the internet infrastructure run. But the experience of Amazon purchasing Twitch was quite an interesting one. So they didn't announce the purchase initially because they were very fearful that the community would react badly to Amazon purchasing Twitch. And so they did a number of things to ease the process. The first was offering every single Twitch user a free subscription to a streamer. So they could gift a streamer a subscription with no cost to themselves. And we were reflecting a little bit just before we were talking about, why do people not view Amazon in the same way as some of the other big tech companies? Because Amazon brings us things. We get a delivery, we get something nice in the post. You get a free subscription to give to your favorite Twitch streamer. Now you can buy your video games directly through Twitch. Your favorite streamer gets a cut of the profits. But there's a reason that Amazon chose to buy a platform like this for $1 billion. Is to see that for many young people today, you can't reach them through advertising on terrestrial television or newspapers. And to reflect perhaps on the role that many of these streamers now have in being a channel from these major corporations directly onto the computers and screens of young people today. And so Twitch talk extensively about their discussions with advertisers and their fears around cord cutters in the US, or even more cord nevers in the US. This fear that there's a generation of people who have never had cable TV in the US, and how on earth will you sell them things? But that many of these people at the kind of pinnacle of Twitch become intermediaries between large customer bases, the hundreds of thousands of people who regularly watch Twitch channels, and major corporations. But how prepared are these young internet celebrities to mediate between these kind of powerful companies? What kinds of contracts are they signing? What kind of relationships do they have with advertisers? And I think perhaps one of the scariest bits of academic research on this was surveys about whether or not viewers understood the relationships between streamers or influencers and companies, and not understanding that their favorite streamer perhaps had some kind of financial incentive to tell you that the stick of RAM with the red bit of plastic on was much better than the stick of RAM with the black bit of plastic that are both made in the same factory, and they get some money from the one that makes one, not understanding that there might be some financial relationship involved there. And to see that perhaps that kind of advertising could move, if we're to take one way of talking about this, from a kind of formal subsumption under capitalism, where we have to agree to sell our time to a horrible boss or whatever, to a kind of real subsumption in which capitalism reaches much more deeply into our lives and influences us in ways that, frankly, in 1996 would have been truly terrifying. However, not to end on the bleakest note, because we are on strike and we should say something positive, is these platforms do retain the possibilities for people to resist in various ways, to think about what kind of collective forms of resistance might be possible. I think what was interesting with YouTube was seeing many of the complaints about the demonetization. How would these things translate into something like Twitch, where people are receiving the subscriptions directly from users and so on? Is to think about, this is a moment in which capital in some ways is trying to subsume some of these platforms, but inevitably there will be resistance and attempts to do things differently. And we should perhaps, through the dark side of YouTube, try and peer for some glimpses of something exciting or brighter that emerge across that. Thank you very much.
Was that dark enough for you? Okay, on the more constructive note, we have time now for a bit of a discussion. So it would be great if we could kick off with a couple of questions directing us into the constructive element of the platforms. So maybe the question from me first to Alessandro. There's quite a lot of movement at the moment where people are trying to create their own distribution platforms and use blockchain to verify proof of view. Do you think there is a glimpse of hope for the new generation to get away from the grip of the YouTube and Google occupation?
I'm not sure I'm the best person to say anything that is not bleak. But I'll try answer that, which of course there's a sense that blockchain is now the next big thing in probably making things better than they are. And maybe, I mean, infrastructurally, I mean, the way in which the big thing about the blockchain is that it develops a way in which we can trust people in different ways that is not possible before. But you can see that coming as a way in which also the blockchain itself will be sort of subject to the stuff that Jamie was talking about. So maybe eventually we'll have things that potentially could be applied through a blockchain infrastructure and make it better. So something like a distributor platform for videos, that could be definitely an option. Then there's two problems, however. One is, will this be sufficient to bring people not to use, for instance, something like YouTube or other major established platforms because they have so much market share and so much at stake that it's difficult to get people not to view these or to use them as users in the case of Facebook, for instance, or Amazon? And how do we get them to use a sort of fairer blockchain-driven platform? That is a question. And the other question, of course, is there may be a sort of dark side to that too. I've read an article recently about blockchain for dating apps as a way to answer the Me Too concerns. So the way in which you develop consent in dating, and
so if a guy rapes you, you're supposed to put something on the blockchain?
Well, essentially, the way I got it was that you, through the blockchain, you sort of mark down that you consented to
I see.
The exchange, which
Yes, that's what everybody
real
wants, their
subsumption.
sexual history to be recorded on a blockchain.
It all looks like a bad episode of Black Mirror. So I don't know. I mean, it can be, but if then the application is something like that, I'm not sure I want something like that, really. No.
This is for the young people, not for us.
As
Probably,
I understand
yeah.
it, the biggest investor in the world in blockchain is IBM.
Who wants to know about their love history?
But if I can add a tiny bit to that, the music industry, again, is an interesting example. There are examples that use the blockchain in a sort of attempt to make it a fair industry.
Yeah.
There's actually a former Middlesex student of ours who has gone on to work with the artist Imogen Heap. Imogen Heap is very much involved in this sort of startup experiment to try and develop a blockchain-based music royalty rights application. We'll see how it goes. I mean, that is clearly a positive one, but it's not that diffused enough to actually say something. It's a nice idea.
Okay, can we open the floor for the questions?
I was very interested in both of your talks that you spoke about the social elements. So you say it's the music, the way music is grouped on YouTube is not according to genre, it's according to social habits. And Jamie, you said that the kind of toxicness of playing online goes into Twitch. So we have a lot of social everyday activities that are infused in these platforms. So there's still a human element beyond the algorithms or the capitalist nature of those platforms. So is that hope?
Want to go first?
You're saying no?
Is there still hope because there's a human? So maybe I come from a slightly different perspective on this than some people in the room. Is I'm less interested in the kind of technical affordances of the platform or how the platform is organized. And I think we can solve a lot of these things by looking at the forms of work involved. So to look at how these platforms, how the work of people becomes entangled in them. And so this is why Twitch is fascinating for me, because you get a sense of being in somebody's living room with them while they play video games. You get a sense that this is their kind of exactly how they behave, that it's effortless, that you get the kind of charisma of them. And in fact, most of the people we spoke to semi-script their streams. They have topics of conversation. The performance is incredibly curated in lots of ways. And it's that digital intimacy that gives the advertising a power that it perhaps doesn't have in other forms. But because it's constituted by work, there is the possibility for resistance. Work is always a conflictual relationship. And I think we can overstate the power of the structures of these platforms. Without the people streaming, Twitch is nothing. Without people putting content up on YouTube, it's nothing.
I like that, yeah.
I'll go for that. Mine was a yes, but answer. Because, one point clearly is that, and the other one, I think it's, there's a long history, I guess, now of platforms, websites, and number of initiatives that started with something in mind or designed for people to do something, and then people use them in a different way. And maybe that will happen again with some of these. So yeah, perhaps if there's an indication that social habits are still at the backbone of a lot of the things that run these platforms, maybe that's one glimpse of hope there, for sure.
Thank you.
Yes?
Yeah, I have a question to, Jamie?
Yes.
Jamie.
Yeah. I don't know whether it's an interesting question, but hopefully I just wanted you to expand a little bit, if you could, on what it was like working with Twitch. So I picked up from your talk that I guess there's some reasons why they wanted to pursue ethnographic research, including the toxicity of comments and that disrupting advertisers and the streamers. And then issues to do with maybe participation and this kind of long tail of effect in participation. So yeah, whether you could sort of expand on what kind of issues they were interested in. And then the second part that I was curious about is that you sort of made this interesting comment about data scientists versus ethnographers. And it seems to me, ethnography has been part of user research for a really long time. Since the 80s at least for HCI. It seems to me more that ethnography is sort of increasingly hybridized into data-driven approaches, and I wonder whether you experienced any of that working with Twitch and being confronted also with their analytics and so on. Do you have any insights about, that's kind of a method issue as well, because I was just wondering a bit more about that. Were there moments where they were directing you towards particular kind of spaces or domains because of their analytics?
So a couple of things on that. Firstly, Twitch don't want us really to do any research on chat. I think they don't know how to deal with it, and I don't think we can answer that question either. It's this kind of huge dark side, much like on YouTube, that how do you even approach a problem like the toxicity of Twitch chat? It's a very difficult thing. My colleague's really interested in it for various reasons. And has a stronger stomach, perhaps. What they're really interested in is, why do people stream? Why do they choose to do it? Why do they choose to do it when they're not being successful? And why do people watch streams? So they would like some further insight that they feel the data can't give them. Perhaps that's to get the stories of things like people who are successful, to have the kind of, the nice stories of people who've made a living out of it, but also that they have nothing to lose by letting us do research. If we, they get to check the research because we have an NDA, otherwise we wouldn't have access. So for them, it's a kind of, there's nothing to be lost from having us around. And what I would say in terms of ethnography and HCI is, so I do workplace ethnography essentially, usually looking for resistance and how people organize. It's quite different to user experience ethnography, so usually longer periods of time, trying to draw out how people resist. So I think ethnography can take many forms in lots of ways. In terms of what that means in practice, essentially what Twitch do is they give us a pass that lets us wander around the convention center kind of unfettered. They don't let us have access to Amazon's data analytics and so on. These things are kind of commercially very sensitive, I would think, in lots of ways. But it's an opportunity for us to get in the door and to talk to people. Streamers are very hard to access because most of them stream from home. So finding streamers and talking to them, Twitchcon is the kind of single moment each year where you can reach a very large number of people. But of course, then you're seeing them outside of their natural mode of interaction with Twitch. But one of the things that somebody remarked to me, which I think is quite interesting, is I asked somebody why I'd travel all the way to TwitchCon. And he said, I come here once a year because I get to meet my colleagues, and it's a really valuable experience for me because no one I know does this. So there's a kind of moment of people coming together to share their experiences, and that's quite a good point to do research, if that makes sense.
So close encounters of the third degree. Yes, there was another question. Okay.
Thank you very much for the talks. General question. I mean, there's lots of issues with these content platforms. Do you think these platforms should be more regulated, or proper regulation is needed for them?
Whitney, you
Oh.
wanna go first with that?
I thought we were going to throw government out. It's a hard question because it's not clear what we want to regulate them for. If you start saying people can't be allowed to say certain things and post, one of the most depressing things for me about the election of Donald Trump has been watching what it's done to previously normal liberal people, which is that they now foam at the mouth when they see, well, things like Pewdiepie and some of these other things, and they suddenly start talking about how they have to be thrown off the platform. And these are people who are like First Amendment fundamentalists, and you go, do you not see that there is a conflict here? And so the first question is, how do we write regulations that will not come back to bite us in the ass later? And I think that's a really crucial thing, because as soon as you put censorship in, you always think you're going to be the ones who are in power to administer it. But we have to build, whatever regulation we build has to be robust against the possibility of a hostile government someday down the line, although I would have said this one was quite hostile to some things. So I think yes, there is definitely a role government should play, but it's very hard figuring out what it is. That's really an unhelpful answer.
I think the difficulty is which government, because US government has got very poor background in data protection.
That's one of the that's part
Germans
of the
would love to regulate it to death. So
that's actually part of the challenge. What happens post-Brexit when there will, if Google and Facebook keep growing, at some point their GDP will be bigger than Britain's. How does the British government impress upon them the need to do what Britain wants? I think it's going to be hard.
I thought you were selling tea.
Jam.
Yes, they were done.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of... Sorry. Yeah. Hi, thank you so much for amazing talks. And there is so much great material. I have 2 points, mainly to Jamie, but also a little bit to Alessandro. One thing, Jamie, I'm going to start with a side note, if you like. Have you considered, when you were doing your research, have you looked into, I'm a qualitative researcher as well, have you looked at alienation in the Marxist sense as a driving force for engagement with various platforms? Have you explored that connection at all? Because there is so much to look at. I'm just curious whether you did or not. But the main thing is, I've been listening to your presentation, and one thing that resonated in my head is that it's a standard, the accumulation of these platforms and getting them into bigger companies. It's your standard story of primitive accumulation. There are the primitive accumulation in a capitalist economy. You have these, you go from accumulation of physical commons and physical goods to virtual services, and anything new that gets created as a new form of commons with any kind of creativity without capitalist control gets sooner or later subsumed. And that leads me to the main question, is the question about subversion in those platforms. What room do we have for subversion within a system that is geared against you, where the means of production, to throw a bit of Marxism in there, is not in your control? Because open source is amazing, but at the end of the day, you have these communities created, you have connections created, and then it gets, but then at the same time you're talking that there is this potential, but at the same time you're saying that people are being subsumed into the system, they're being transformed into A, neoliberal subjects, and B, they're being formed into laborers in a much more bonded way than in other forms of employment. So what avenues for subversion are there? Please give us some love.
Okay, so 2 things there. The first, anecdotally, I think alienation is a very good way to explain the consumption of media like this. I think estrangement is a better way to think of it, but this is because I have a philosophical problem with alienation. I don't think there's something we can go back to. I don't think there is a real human self that existed pre-capitalism in an idealized form. I think rather we're estranged from ourselves, and through struggle and overthrowing of our conditions, we can reach what a kind of better set of conditions. It's maybe not the most important point to stress. I see platforms like Twitch as a kind of online labor that we could say perhaps is a kind of elite online labor that could have analogies with platforms like Uber, Deliveroo, Upwork, where people are earning huge amounts for their activity. But there are some analogies with, other forms of kind of freelance online work. And so in that way, if we were to couch things in more Marxist terms, this is not going to be a vanguard that transforms all of the conditions, because in many ways they're doing very well. They clearly have things that they could challenge the platform over in terms of how revenue is shared and so on. But real transformation is going to happen from people who are being proletarianized by these kind of platforms. So the massive numbers of people who are employed to do content moderation for YouTube, or to train AI for self-driving cars or so on, or the people who ship the Amazon packages across Europe. That's where the potential for change comes from, and hopefully we win some of the streamers and video influencers along the way.
Can I add something, which is, I've been reading stories, it's kind of tangential, but I've been reading stories the last while. Annalee Newitz had a great piece in Ars Technica about raters, the raters of content moderators. A lot of them are people in the Philippines and places like that. And I really wonder about the future of international relations. These people are looking at the worst of what we post, and it is forming their opinion about us. And I really think that somewhere down the line, that's going to be a really bad thing.
Absolutely.
Can we come back to your question?
I wanted to ask, to what extent does the panel think that handling moderation on channels such as YouTube and Twitch is an increasingly impossible task? For instance, YouTube's delayed response to Logan Paul's video, people doing things like swatting each other on Twitch, the automated responses to these sort of sins in the community cause outrage amongst the viewers, and the human ones also do. Does the responsibility lie with the viewers to simply vote with their clicks in a way to stop watching things, or is the sort of addictive nature of these platforms to blame? And who ultimately, where does the responsibility fall? Do you guys think on the panel would be interesting to do?
You're looking at me again. It was very interesting after the swatting incident in Kansas, where somebody was killed by over-energetic police who had been called by one of these things. And it was very interesting because all the Americans on one of the mailing lists I'm on were sort of talking about how swatting needs to be made illegal. There needs to be X, Y, and Z things happening with swatting. And one of my British friends chimed in and said, none of you has anything to say about the police being armed and trigger happy? And they're sort of going, what? And so, I actually think there are some things that need to be solved in the States by demilitarizing the police. And that's outside of the platform, but it's part of the context that things like swatting take place in. What was the rest of the question?
Content moderation.
Content moderation. The only thing that in the history of the net, going back to 1980s bulletin boards and CompuServe and Kix and so forth, the only thing that has ever worked for a long period of time is human moderation. And one of the ways, Slashdot actually has a very good moderation system, which is that everybody takes turns. And to do that, you have to have a community, and to have a community, you have to be smaller.
But also there's another aspect to it. We did quite a lot of work on the follow-on algorithm on YouTube, and that algorithm really loves outrageous comments, absolutely loves it. So if a video incites outrageous comments, that video goes viral like there is no tomorrow. So it's all embedded in the algorithm because it looks for the time series analysis and the engagement, i.e. being completely outrageous. So I think at the moment the battle is going the other way, and short of any intervention and I can't see any appetite from any corner for that. I think we're training the algorithms to really zero on outrage more and more. So I think that problem is yet to be faced.
Yeah, so a couple of things on that. I think we need to rethink how we understand or how we conceive of things like data or algorithms in terms of work. And so a colleague of mine at Uni Global, which is a trade union federation, called Christina Kokla, wrote a series of demands about how trade unionists should think about data and should think about algorithms. And often I think about these things in terms of platforms like Uber, but we could apply that to a platform like YouTube or Twitch. Is an algorithm should have to explain, not to personify it too much, but there should be an explanation for the choices that algorithms make, particularly if these algorithms are used to demonetize or, in the terms of the gig economy, deactivate workers. Is why can't we have an explanation for how these things work? Why isn't there a person who's responsible for these things? And we should turn these things into, rather than things where we say, please someone regulate it for us, we should turn these things into demands. It's our data. Why can't we have a say in what happens to it? Why can't we have access to it? And so just a very, very, very short example, I wrote a paper with a delivery driver who had to self-track his deliveries to find out how much he was cycling and where he was going. All data that the platform collects on him from his smartphone but won't allow him access to. So he had to wear a GPS watch to self-track and figure these things out. Why does he not have a right to that data? And we could say the same for a Twitch streamer. Why do they not have an explanation for how their activity works on the platform?
But don't you think law helps make that happen?
So to be a little bit, to dodge the question slightly, I think we can make laws happen by how we demand and fight for them.
That is true.
You know, nothing is ever a gift to us.
No.
2 more questions and then we wrap up. So.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a straw man to talk about what algorithms are doing or what AI is doing, when actually on platforms like YouTube or Twitch, it's actually advertisers or perceptions about what advertisers want. I mean, my research is on YouTube, so it certainly works that way. The Logan Paul video, for example, didn't actually violate any community guidelines. And that wasn't demonetized, but a lot of LGBT content will be demonetized because advertisers don't want to be associated with it. And I think they're a big, even YouTube, which is owned by Google, you know, obviously a hugely powerful company, they still absolutely sort of shit themselves anytime big advertisers leave, and these brands and advertisers still have a huge amount of power. And so let's not erase them by talking about what algorithms or AI does, because that's still a huge piece of the puzzle, I think.
That's one of the things. That's one of the things that I would really, if I could make one change in public awareness, is that I would really like everybody to see the company behind the device in their hand, because they just, you know, every time I see it when I'm holding a phone, I sort of see Google behind it collecting things. But most people don't. You suggested a new phrase to me, too big to demonetize.
One more question?
Sort of a follow-up question on the idea that they're markets and also the thing with advertisers. Some of the literature that I found really insightful around platforms is this economic literature around them being multi-sided. And it seems to me that, the advertising situation is relevant for thinking about Facebook and some aspects of Google. But when we're talking about platforms more generally in terms of intermediaries and who they bring together, there's of course many different models for how that happens. I wonder, in the case of Twitch, there seems to be at least 4 groups. There's game developers, advertisers, viewers, and streamers, and I'm throwing that perspective out. I'm throwing it to you because I wonder, does this transform how we think about labor and resistance? When we think about them as this multi-sided market, because it seems like there's quite a lot of complex dynamics at play in terms of positive and negative externalities that that are occurring.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, when I talked at the beginning of my talk about advertising, it's quite complicated on Twitch because you have a mix of endemic and non-endemic advertising. The endemic advertising stuff that comes from the video games industry already has less of an issue with some of the content on the platform because they're already associated with the games industry in various ways. But the non-endemic sponsors, so things like MasterCard, Coca-Cola, car companies and so on, and Duracell batteries, which had some problems with people extensively trolling their paid streams to try and get them off the platform. So you had viewers kind of knowing that their activities would upset the advertisers. It means you end up with a number of competing interests. But I also think the role of Amazon introduces a whole nother aspect, which is essentially Amazon wants to build an alternative to Steam, an alternative distribution platform for video games through Twitch, so you can launch games directly from Twitch to find some way to compete with what is essentially a monopoly. So you end up with a number of different competing interests that influence the dynamics on the platform in various ways. And then just briefly, I'm not entirely sure I understand. So one of the things is I would prefer to talk about work, but I think the algorithms are a component part that we should talk about, but clearly advertising is shaping these things in huge ways. I would go further than that to say that it's capital in various ways that's shaping this. I think advertising has always been, along with marketing, built on very shaky foundations in terms of what it can actually deliver or not. And I think what we're seeing with Amazon is not just advertising money, but capital trying to recoup profits from Twitch viewers in a whole number of ways, not just selling them products or selling them ideas of products, but actually finding a way to integrate Amazon deeper into your life, which I think goes way beyond just advertising to you. I think it's these platforms monetizing whole sections of our life that we didn't think would be possible.
Yeah, I read a piece not long ago about there's a very long piece by a young economist about why Amazon is a much bigger threat in general than the other platforms. And I think one of the things about it is that Facebook and Google are both advertising supported, and Amazon has two. They have one product each, which is how they sell advertising. Amazon has two, well, three possibly. It has advertising on Twitch, but it also has its retail operation and it has its cloud services operation. And both of those are gigantic, and the cloud operation is invisible to people, so they don't really see how much power Amazon has actually amassed. I think of the companies, it's probably the most dangerous, but we don't perceive it that way, which you said.
I thought the outage, was it last year or the year before, where an Amazon web developer accidentally reset a load of servers, and you suddenly saw how many things rely on Amazon, was a real moment of, oh, okay, so
Well, one of the amazing things is Netflix was entirely built on Amazon Cloud Services, and it got quite large before it had to, before it realized it really had to have a backup plan. Yeah.
Okay, just to sum up and send you for drinks. On the positive, I think we are at least identifying where the dark clouds are. On the negative, there's a heck of a lot of them, and they're very centralized, and there is only a small handful of us. But I think the more the reason to thank you, the researchers who take time, produce papers and share as much as possible, negotiate with those platforms, negotiate access, and at least allow us the glimpse of how good or bad things are, so at least we can have those conversations. So on that note, thank you very much, all of you, for fantastic talks. Thank you for coming on the cold day, much appreciated, and I hope you can stay for drinks and beers. Thank you.